There's a cabin standing in a clearing right now, somewhere up in high country. 4 square walls of good notched logs, a roof that's held 30 winters, a stone chimney a man built with his own 2 hands. And inside it, sitting upright in a chair pulled close to a cold hearth, is a man who froze to death in the one place he built to keep him alive. Not a tent, not a snow hole, not caught out in the open with the storm clawing at him. A cabin, walls thick as your forearm, and he died in it the same as if he'd laid down naked in a drift. Now I want you to sit with that before you decide I'm telling tales. Because here's the thing that ought to stop you cold. The cabin didn't fail him. The cabin did exactly what he built it to do. The walls held, the roof held, and it killed him anyway, quiet and patient, while he sat there believing 4 walls meant he was safe. I've spent a long stretch of my life in country where the nearest other living soul was 2 days' hard walk down a frozen river, and I'm telling you the woods never killed me half as fast as a roof over my head nearly did one bad winter. So stay with me, because the mistake that put that man in the ground costs nothing to fix. Not a dollar, not a dime. And nearly every soul who builds a shelter against the cold gets it wrong without ever knowing they did. Let me tell you who I am first, so you understand I'm not guessing at any of this. I ran a trap line 9 winters alone. No store to drive to, no help to call, no truck idling outside to climb into when it got bad. I built my own shelters and I slept in them, and I learned the hard way what the old hands already knew, most of it off a man who'd buried friends over exactly this. My grandfather ran lines before me and his hands before him, and the one thing every one of them carried in their head, not their pack, their head, was that a shelter is not the same thing as warmth. And a man who confuses the two is a man on a clock. Before I go on, do me one small thing. If you want the old ways kept alive instead of buried with the men who knew them, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss what comes next. That's the whole price of admission, and it costs you nothing but a tap. Now stay right here with me, because what comes next is the part that gets good people killed. Here is the mistake, and it is the very first thing, so if you miss this next piece, none of the rest of it will hold together for you. When a man builds a shelter against the cold, he builds it big. He builds it proud. He builds a room he can stand up in and stretch out in and store his gear in and feel like a man in. 4 good walls and headroom and space to move. And that, right there, that space is the thing that kills him. Because here is the part nobody teaches anymore. You do not heat a room. You cannot. You haven't got the fuel, and you haven't got the fire, and you haven't got the hours in a night to throw warmth into all that empty air and keep it there. Every cubic foot of space inside those walls is space you've got to warm, and the cold is pulling it back out through those very logs every second you're alive. A big shelter is a big mouth, and you will spend the whole night feeding it and never once fill it. The old hands knew a thing the modern man forgot the day he started buying his warmth instead of building it. They knew that a shelter has one job, and that job is not to be big. It is to be small, small enough to hold the heat your own body throws off, and barely bigger than that. The native peoples who wintered in this country for 1,000 years running didn't build themselves grand lodges to freeze in. They built low, and they built tight, and they built small, and they piled in close, and they let their own bodies do the warming, because a body is a fire that never goes out as long as you feed it. And the newcomers, the trappers, and the settlers who copied the building and skipped the wisdom, raised themselves fine big cabins with high ceilings and room to spare, and some of them froze solid inside walls that should have saved them. Now here's where most folks go wrong, so lean in close, because if this next piece doesn't land, then nothing else I tell you will keep you alive down deep. Most people carry the belief that more shelter is more safety. that a bigger, sturdier, finer-built structure is a warmer one. It is about the most natural belief in the world, and out here it's dead wrong. The cold doesn't care how proud your walls are. The cold cares about volume and air and the slow truth of where your heat goes when you lie down. A big tight cabin can kill you deader than a small leaky lean-to, and I'm going to show you exactly why before we're through. And I'll plant this here for you to hold, the same way it was planted in me. The men who built the best cabins were sometimes the very ones who didn't wake up. Keep that in the back of your mind because it matters more than anything else I'll tell you today. And I'll circle back and close that loop before we're done. When I do, it's going to change how you think about a roof over your head for the rest of your life. So let me hand you the fix the way it was handed to me, in layers, because dumping it all at once would rob it of its weight. And I'll pair every piece with its reason, because a rule you don't understand is a rule you'll break the first cold night you're too tired to remember it. The first layer flips your whole head around. You build small, not big. The smaller the space, the less of it there is to warm, and the more of that warming your own body can do, just lying there breathing. You want a shelter you can near about touch all four walls of without standing up. Low roof, tight walls, no wasted air. It'll feel like a coffin to a man used to a parlor, and that's exactly the feeling that keeps you breathing till morning. A space barely bigger than your body is a space your body can hold heat in. The second layer is the one almost everybody gets backward. You break that big cabin down into a smaller one inside it. If you've got a great drafty room you can't help, you build a smaller shelter within those walls, a bunk boxed in tight, a corner curtained off with hide or canvas or boughs, a low platform with a roof of its own close over it. You don't try to heat the whole barn. You heat the stall. The old trappers in those big line cabins didn't sleep sprawled in the middle of the floor. They built themselves a little walled bunk in the warmest corner and shut the cold room out of it. Make the space that holds your warmth as small as you can and let the big cold room be somebody else's problem. This is the right time to remind you, if you're getting something out of this, do that subscribe and that like, and ring the bell so the next one finds you. There's no money in this knowledge for the man who keeps it free, which is the very reason it nearly died, and the only way it stays alive is folks like you passing it hand to hand. So tap those, and let's keep going, because the next layer is the one that put that man dead in his chair. The third layer is the floor, and it's the one nobody sees coming. A cabin floor is the same thief as the bare ground, only worse, because a man trusts a floor. He'd never lie down on bare, frozen dirt outside, but he'll stretch out on a plank floor or a packed earth floor inside four walls and never think twice, and that floor will drink the warmth straight out of his backside all night long, the same as the open ground would. The cold doesn't stop at your wall. It comes up through the dirt under your floor, and it pools low in that room, heavy as water, and it lies there against your boards waiting for you to lie down on it. You get up off that floor. You build a bunk, a platform, anything that puts a span of trapped air between your body and the cold coming up from below. And you keep your bed up high because the warm air you do make rises, and the killing cold sinks, and the difference between the warm air at the rafters and the cold air at the floor in a tall room can be the difference between a stiff morning and no morning at all. The fourth layer is the one that sounds like madness until it clicks. You want gaps. After everything I've told you about building tight, here's the turn. You do not seal yourself in a box around a fire, because the same small tight space that holds your warmth will hold something else if you've got a flame or a banked bed of coals in there with you, and that something else has no color and no smell and no smoke to warn you, and it does not wake you. It lays you down softer. It fills that snug little room you were so proud of, breath by slow breath, until there's none of the good air left. And a tired, cold man welcomes that heavy, warm sleep like an old friend right up until it's the last thing he ever feels. So you keep a gap low near the floor and a little vent up high, 2 fingers of open air, and you let the killer drift out all night while you sleep. Build tight, but never sealed. That's the line that separates the men who wake up from the men who don't. Now, circle back to what I told you to hold on to, that riddle of how a man freezes in a cabin he built right, because here's the whole answer laid out plain, and once you see it, the rest locks into place. The man who builds a poor shelter knows he's cold. He feels every draft, he curses every gap, he keeps his fire fed and his blood moving, and he stays half awake and miserable and alive. But the man who builds a fine big cabin, 4 square walls and a proud roof, he feels safe. The walls tell him he's safe. And so he doesn't build the small space inside, and he doesn't get up off the floor, and he lets that high, cold room pool its heavy cold around him, and he sits down by his little fire in all that empty air, believing the hard part is done. And the cold comes up through the floor and gathers low and works at him quiet and patient, hour after hour, and it doesn't sting him awake the way the wind would, because there's no wind in here. There's just the slow, silent drinking of the heat out of him. The better the cabin felt, the more he trusted it. And the more he trusted it, the likelier he was to skip every single thing that would have saved him. The storm kills the careless. The cabin kills the confident. And now you understand why a man could do the whole hard job of building 4 good walls and still not see the sunrise. You're probably wondering by now why nobody ever told you this, why it isn't plain common knowledge, and the answer is the quiet kind, the kind that's about money and not about mystery, and it's got nothing to do with any conspiracy. A piece of survival wisdom only stays alive as long as people need it. The day the wagon road reached the valley and a man could buy a stove and a tag with an R number printed on it, the knowing started to fade. And there's good money in selling a man warmth he buys again every winter, the stoves and the heaters and the fill by the pound, and there was never one thin dime in telling him to build smaller and sleep off the floor and leave 2 fingers of air. A thing that costs nothing and never breaks is a thing nobody in the business of selling has any reason to put in front of you. It's no cover-up. It's just the quiet arithmetic of what sells, and the free knowledge doesn't advertise while the expensive answer can afford to shout. Now let me be straight with you, the way I'd want a man to be straight with me, because I'd rather you trust me than be impressed by me. I won't dress this up bigger than it is. This isn't coming for most of you, because you've got a furnace humming and a town down the road, and you're not going to freeze in a cabin this winter. To die of this, you'd have to be caught out far from help, in a shelter you built wrong with the cold bearing down for real. But I'll tell you that every man it ever came for thought that exact same thing, sitting safe in his proud walls, right up until the moment it had him. And I won't soften the modern truth either, because honesty cuts both ways. A little battery alarm for the bad air costs you $20, and it'll scream when your nose can't. And a wise man carries the old rule and the new tool both. So here's the whole of it, small enough to carry and free as the snow on the ground. Build small, not big, because you heat a body, not a room. Build a smaller shelter inside a big one if a big one's all you've got. Get up off the floor, because the floor is the thief. Keep your bed high where the warm air gathers, and your head out of the cold that pools low. And never, ever seal a flame in the place where you sleep. 2 fingers of air, low and high, all night long. Do that much, and the country can throw its hardest winter straight at you, and you'll still walk out come spring. None of it cost a thing. And that's the part I love most, because the very thing that saves your life is the knowing, and the knowing is the part they can't sell you and can't take back once you've got it. Those men didn't die because the woods were cruel. The woods were only ever just the woods. They died because they were certain. certain that walls meant warmth, certain that a roof meant safe, certain they already knew the one thing they didn't know at all. And the wilderness never kills the humble man half as fast as it kills the sure one. If this kept one thing in your head that might keep you alive someday, do the last thing I'll ask of you. Subscribe, hit that like, and turn on the bell, because the people who built this country with their hands knew 1,000 things like this. Hard won and handed down and nearly lost, and the only way they don't go in the ground for good is you and me passing them on. So tell me down in the comments, what's the one thing your own people did to stay warm through a hard winter that the rest of us have plain forgotten? Because half of what I know I learned from somebody else's grandfather, and I'd be a fool to think I've heard them all. And before you go, here's what's been gnawing at me to tell you next. There's an old rule about water in the wild that runs dead against common sense, the kind where the clearer and prettier and more inviting that stream looks, the more likely it is to lay a strong man flat for a week. The old hands had a way to read it before they ever filled a cup, and it wasn't the smell and it wasn't the look. I'll show you what it was. Until then, take care of your fire, keep your shelter small and your air moving, and don't ever trust four walls to tell you the truth.